Our first reading today is Psalms 119, verses 97 through 104 from the Laughing Bird version. Lord, how I love your teachings. I keep them in my thoughts all day long. I'm able to stand a jump ahead of my enemies because your guidance is always with me. Studying your instructions has taught me far more than I could ever learn from the best teachers. Following your rules to the letter has given me more wisdom than old age brings. I steer clear of the paths of corruption so that I can stick on to the track that you have set. You have taught me well, and I won't dodge any of your directions. Your words taste so sweet on my tongue. They are like strawberries and cream. Your commands have given me great understanding and made me allergic to lies and corruption. And today's scripture reading comes from Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 31 from the New Revised Standard Version. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God's face to face, yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip.
Okay, I'll just come out and say it. That was a strange story, right? But that is to be expected because the Bible can be a strange book, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. It's a collection of writings that were composed over a long period of time, from about 1200 BC to about 100 in the Common Era. And it was written in 3 languages that are now considered dead, or at least no longer used in the same form today. And within those languages, there are a bunch of different literary styles that affect how the scriptures are translated and interpreted in other languages. And we also have to remember that much of the Bible began as oral tradition. And, stories are passed down for generations before they were ever written down. So yes, it is complicated. But that helps explain why some stories are so hard to understand. If we lived in that time and place when they were first told, we probably wouldn't think they were strange at all. But here we are living in 21st century Western civilization, trying to figure out why Jacob sent his family and his possessions ahead of him in the night, only to have a man wrestle with him until daybreak. Oh, sure, that happens to me all the time, right? Happens to you too? Nothing unusual here. So anytime you run into a story like this in the Bible, there's usually something else going on beneath the surface that we're not seeing. So the first thing that we need to do is look at the context. First of all, let's talk about this Jacob fellow, who he is. Jacob is one of the patriarchs of Israel's history. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all trace their roots back to Abraham, who traveled from the land of Ur, which is in what we know today as Iraq, southern Iraq, and he traveled to Canaan, which is what we know now as Israel and Palestine. God made a covenant with Abraham that he would become the ancestor of a people who would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. And one of his sons, Isaac, had twins, 2 boys, Jacob and Esau. And Esau came out first. That's important for you to remember now. But let me tell you, these boys did not get along whatsoever. Jacob was all brains and Esau was all brawn. And Jacob used those brains to cheat his brother out of his inheritance, which caused Esau to chase him all over Canaan to get even. And the story that Barbara read happened as Jacob was preparing to meet Esau and make amends. Jacob wasn't looking forward to that meeting at all. He was terrified. He knew that he messed up. He knew he was in the wrong there. And he wasn't sure whether that reunion would end well. Maybe he sent his family ahead of him so that because he needed some time alone to think about what he was going to do when he met with his brother. And then boom, out of nowhere, Jacob was left alone and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Who was this man? Did the man challenge Jacob? Did Jacob challenge the man? Who started this? Why did it even happen? And why did it happen at night? And why did it last all night? Why did the man strike the hip socket, which, by the way, is illegal move in wrestling? It didn't do much good because Jacob kept fighting. And then the man finally said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." And you have to ask, what? Did he have somewhere that he needed to be? I mean, was he wanting to go and make sure he got to the early riser special at the Canaanite Cozy Diner, you know? Could he only wrestle at night? And then Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Was "until you bless me" the same as "until you tap out"? And then the man told him, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel," which in Hebrew means one who struggles with God. Jacob, now known as Israel, then asked the man's name, and the man replied, "Why do you ask?" and blessed him, and that was it. And Jacob named this place Peniel, which means face of God. Why did he call it that? Well, because he said, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is still preserved." So many questions here. Who was this man? Was it just a man? Was he some emissary or messenger sent by God? Was he an angel? Or was this God? What's going on here? Like so many people who don't understand something, especially when it comes to Scripture, we want to fabricate a factual, rational explanation. Why can we not just let this story be a mystery? I mean, because we modern era Western folks really don't like mysteries. We say, "Oh, but come on, Jesse, we like Murder, She Wrote and Murders in the Building and all these different murder mystery movies. Scooby-Doo, we like Scooby-Doo." Ruh-roh, yeah, you better believe Ruh-roh, you just wait. For us, we think we need to, we don't like mysteries. We want mysteries that can be solved, preferably in 30 minutes to 120 minutes. We want to know all the details, and if we can't come up with a rational explanation, we think that it invalidates the story altogether. So we struggle. We wrestle until we can come up with something that's certain, something that makes enough sense so that our beliefs can remain intact. But here's the irony of the story. The story is about wrestling with God, not wrestling to solve a mystery. And when we wrestle with God, it ends up changing our very identity. Jacob's name means heel grabber, which is appropriate because remember, he was the second one out. He got a hold of his brother's ankle, his heel, and even though he was the first one out, he was right there just grabbing him at the heels. Now his name is Israel, one who struggles with God. It wasn't just a name, it was an identity. Can't we just let this story about how God's people became known as Israel be just that? Oh, no. No. We've got to spend all sorts of time, effort, and energy saying things like, well, of course it was God who Jacob wrestled with. Why else would Jacob say, I have seen God face to face? And then somebody else comes along and says, well, humans couldn't see God. Only the high priest could be in the presence of God once a year, but then they still couldn't see God. So does that mean the man who wrestled Jacob wasn't God? I mean, God wouldn't sucker punch somebody, right? Then someone else comes along and says, no, it was God. And then another person comes along and says, so you're saying that this person was God in human flesh? Because I read the New Testament, and the last time I read it, that title belongs to Jesus. And on and on and on and on we go, looking for certainty where God only asks us to have faith. Heck, even the notes of the New Interpreter's Study Bible says, interpreters have puzzled over the nature of this figure. No kidding, right? Listen, if you're interested in this, there are many, many fascinating articles out there written by biblical scholars who love to puzzle over hard-to-interpret stories. But my point is this, it's not the point. My point is we all wrestle with God to some degree or another. And Jacob wasn't the only person in the Bible that wrestled with God, because after years of praying for a child with no results, his grandparents Abraham and Sarah wrestled with God. Moses wrestled with God because he became frustrated with leading the Hebrew people out in the wilderness for 40 years after they escaped from Egypt. It seemed like they couldn't get anything right. God would tell them what to do, and they'd turn around and do the very opposite of what God told them to do. In Numbers 14, Moses asked God, why have you treated your servant so badly? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give birth to them that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom? I am not able to carry all these people alone, for they are too heavy for me. And then there's my favorite book in the Old Testament, Job. He lost everything, and in his grief and sickness, he cried out to God, why? Why me? Jeremiah, the prophet we read about last week, wrestled with God when the people abused him and rejected him. And what's frustrating is that God told Jeremiah ahead of time that the people weren't going to listen to him. And yet he was supposed to prophesy anyway. The entire book of Psalms is filled with examples of David and other psalmists struggling with God. And after repeatedly praying for healing but not receiving it, the Apostle Paul wrestled with God too. And in anguish over his inability to believe that Jesus was resurrected, Thomas, the disciple, who we call Doubting Thomas, wrestled with God. In all four of the Gospels, the writers portrayed Jesus' struggle with God in the Garden of Gethsemane right before he was betrayed. Luke's version is the most heart-wrenching of all of the Gospels. Jesus prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." And then described Jesus' sweat pouring out of him as blood. And then on the cross, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Here's something that I've discovered throughout my faith journey. Wrestling with God is a crucial activity for disciples. Sometimes we need to wrestle with God about our theological beliefs, both personally and as a church. Other times we need to wrestle with God concerning our relationships at home, at work, with family, at church, with society in general. Discipleship can sometimes be hard and complex work. Therefore, our wrestling match with the Almighty is never finished. Don't be afraid to wrestle with God. Every disciple who takes faith seriously will occasionally walk away with a limp, a reminder that we've been touched by something holy. But remember, Jacob didn't just walk away limping. He walked away blessed. The same God who meets us in the struggle is the one who calls us by a new name and sends us into the dawn of a new day. Such is the mystery, the pain, and the beauty of wrestling with God and finding in the end that God never lets us go.